Welcome to this presentation on genetics. Today we're going to be covering genetics and what is heredity. We're going to be taking a look at the history of genetics and some very basics on heredity. Before we begin, we need to start with some background vocabulary. This unit is very heavy with vocabulary. There are a lot of vocabulary terms to know. So be sure to check out the links for Quizlet that I share with you in class to review this vocabulary and make sure that you have a good solid foundation in the vocabulary. And the first vocabulary term is heredity, the passing of physical characteristics or traits from parents to offspring. Fertilization is when an egg and a sperm join together and create a new organism. Their DNA combines to create a new organism with unique DNA. A purebred organism is one that produces many generations of offspring with the same form of the trait. For example, a tall plant that only produces tall offspring, or a short plant that only produces short offspring. A trait is a specific characteristic that an organism can pass to its offspring through its genes. And a generation is all offspring that are at the same stage of descent from a common ancestor. So who is Gregor Mendel and what did he observe? Well, Gregor Mendel is considered the father of genetics. He was a priest and he studied and experimented in his garden with pea plants. And he started off with tall pea plants and short pea plants, and he did various crosses with them and made some observations about the offspring. So a key point is that Mendel discovered that heredity is the passing of physical characteristics or traits from parents to offspring. And let's take a closer look at Mendel's experiments. Mendel cross-pollinated tall and short plants, pea plants, and observed the traits that were found in the offspring. He started with purebred plants, so he started with tall plants that produced multiple generations of only tall plants, and short plants that produced multiple generations of only short plants. So he started with purebred tall and short plants, and he found the traits of the offspring to be predictable. And the offspring have a special name. Let's take a look at the generations that Mendel came up with in his experiments. So the purebred parents, we'll call them parents, they're the parental generation. They're the start of the experiment. And they are called the P generation. P for parent or purebred. And F1 is the first generation. That's from crossing purebred plants. He crossed, you can see in the picture, a purebred tall with a purebred short plant. And their offspring is the first generation. And then he took those plants and crossed them, and their offspring was called the F2 generation. So the first generation is F1, the second generation is F2. Now Mendel he found something very interesting, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but I want you to understand that he didn't just study the height of plants. He made this discovery, and then he said, well, I wonder if this is the same with all of these other traits. So he started looking at some other traits, and he repeated his pea plant experiment, observing these other traits. And some examples are purple or white flowers, yellow or green seeds, smooth or wrinkled seeds, yellow or green pods, and smooth or wrinkled pods. So he looked at numerous traits in pea plants, not just height, and his results were the same. He discovered that only one form of the trait appeared in the F1 generation. For example, you can see in this experiment, looking at the parental generation, he crossed purebred tall with purebred short plants, and that resulted in 100% of the F1 or first generation offspring being tall, and the short trait is lost. But then in the second generation, in the F2 generation, that lost trait always reappeared in about 1/4 of the plants. Mendel's experiments form the foundation of genetics. To be continued.